Single mother finds elderly couple abandoned at bus stop, and her reaction touches hearts. Rachel adjusted the baby in her arms and felt her heart tighten at the devastating scene at the Hope District bus stop. Two elderly people were huddled under torn blankets, shivering from the cold on the freezing New York dawn. The light rain that had been falling for 3 days had stopped, but the biting July wind still punished those with nowhere to shelter. Rachel was coming from her night shift as a cleaner at the hospital and was waiting for the first bus of the day when she noticed the two figures weren't ordinary homeless people. Something in the elderly woman's posture, even hunched over by age and cold, revealed a dignity that contrasted with the situation. "Excuse me," said Rachel, approaching slowly. "Are you all right?" The woman looked up, revealing a face marked by time, but with an intelligent and alert expression. She must have been about 70, with grey hair escaping from a faded scarf. Beside her, a man of the same age seemed more confused, staring into space. "We're waiting for our children to come pick us up," the elderly woman replied in a trembling voice. "They said it would only be for a few hours." Rachel felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The baby Ethan, just 8 months old, stirred restlessly in her arms, as if sensing the tension in the air. "How long have you been here?" she asked, already fearing the answer. "Since yesterday morning," the lady murmured, and then added in an even lower voice, "Or was it the day before? I don't remember well." The man beside her mumbled something inaudible and pulled the blanket closer to his face. Rachel noticed his hands were shaking excessively, and not just from the cold. "What are your names?" "I'm Mrs. Dorothy, and this is my husband, Mr. Harold. He hasn't been quite right in the head lately." The words came out laden with pain and embarrassment. Rachel knew that shame of exposing family difficulties to strangers all too well. She had gone through it herself when she got pregnant with Ethan, and the father disappeared, leaving her alone to face the neighborhood's judgments and whispers. The bus Rachel was waiting for appeared at the end of the street, its headlights cutting through the morning fog. She looked at the two elderly people, then at Ethan sleeping in her arms, and felt she couldn't simply get on that bus and pretend she hadn't seen anything. "Come with me," she said impulsively. "You'll get sick out here in the cold." "No, dear, thank you," Mrs. Dorothy replied. "Our children will be worried if they don't find us here." But there was something in her tone of voice that suggested she herself no longer believed those words. Rachel let the bus pass and sat down beside the elderly couple on the cold bench at the stop. "Listen, Mrs. Dorothy, I live nearby in a small studio apartment, but at least it has a roof and is heated. You can call your children from there and let them know where you are." Mr. Harold suddenly became agitated and grabbed Rachel's arm with surprising strength. "Do you know Mr. Walter's bakery?" he asked, his eyes suddenly bright with lucidity. "It's on the street above, made the best sweet bread in the area." Rachel froze. She did know. It was where her grandmother used to take her every morning when she was a child before school. Mrs. Betty would always give her a little piece of chocolate cake while her grandmother bought bread, but the bakery had closed years ago. "Mr. Walter's bakery closed a long time ago," she said gently. "It didn't close," insisted Mr. Harold, becoming agitated. "We are the owners, Antonia and I." "Where is our bakery, Dorothy? What did they do to our bakery?" "Mrs." Dorothy held her husband's hand and calmed him with gestures that betrayed decades of patience and care. "Calm down, Harold. Let's go with the young lady, all right? She's going to help us find our children." That's how Rachel found herself walking through the empty streets of Hope District, carrying Ethan in one hand and supporting Mrs. Dorothy with the other, while Mr. Harold walked slowly beside them, murmuring about breads and customers who no longer came. Rachel's studio apartment was on the second floor of an old building. It was just 20 square meters that housed a single bed, a makeshift crib made of crates, a small sink, and a 2-burner stove. But it was clean and warm. "Wow, what a cozy place," Mrs. Dorothy lied politely, but Rachel noticed the genuine gratitude in her eyes. While preparing hot tea, Rachel observed her unexpected guests. Now, under the yellow light of the bulb, she could better see their condition. Their clothes, although old and dirty, were of good quality. Mrs. Dorothy wore a worn gold wedding band, and Mr. Harold had a watch on his wrist that looked expensive, even scratched. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you have your children's phone numbers? We can call to let them know you're here." The elderly woman rummaged in a cloth bag she carried and pulled out a crumpled paper with some numbers written down. "I have Sharon's, my daughter. She's a nurse. And Brian's, my youngest son." Rachel dialed the first number on her old cell phone. It rang several times before an irritated female voice answered. "Hello? Hi, is this Sharon? I'm here with your mother and father. They were at the bus stop since yesterday and—" "Who is this? How did you get this number?" The voice became even harsher. "I'm Rachel. I found them at the Hope District bus stop. They're okay, but they needed to get out of the cold." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Look, whoever you are, don't meddle in matters that aren't your business. My parents are problematic and liars. If you're expecting some reward for taking care of them, forget it." "I'm not expecting anything. I just wanted to let you know that they always do this, you know? They make up stories to get attention. My father hits my mother and she covers for him. I'm not coming to get them. Do whatever you want." The call ended abruptly. Rachel stared at the phone, trying to process what she had heard. She looked at Mrs. Dorothy, who pretended not to have heard the conversation, but whose shoulders were even more hunched. She tried the second number. Brian answered on the third ring. "What is it now?" The voice sounded irritated and sleepy. Rachel explained the situation again, choosing her words carefully. "Oh, you're the person who's with them," Brian said with a slightly mocking tone. "My sister already told me. Look, we've tried everything with these two. They don't want to stay anywhere. They keep running away from nursing homes, making up that we mistreat them. It's too much suffering for the whole family." "But they were abandoned at the bus stop." "They weren't abandoned. They left on their own, like they always do. If you want to take care of them, that's your problem. Just don't come complaining later when you find out how difficult they are." Another call ended abruptly. Rachel felt a mix of anger and confusion. She looked at the two elderly people who were now drinking the hot tea with trembling hands. Could it be that these people who seemed so fragile and harmless were really problematic? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. "Mrs. Dorothy," Rachel said, sitting beside her, "what happened yesterday? How did you end up at the bus stop?" The elderly woman sighed deeply and wrapped her hands around the teacup. "Sharon came to our house yesterday morning. She said we had to leave, that she couldn't handle our problems anymore. She grabbed Harold by the arm and told me to pack a change of clothes. She said she was taking us to a very good home, that it would be better for everyone." "And then?" "Then she put us in her car and started driving around the city. Harold was very nervous, asking where we were going. She yelled at him, told him to be quiet. When she reached that bus stop, she told us to get out and said someone would come pick us up in a few hours." "And you got out?" "What could we do, dear? She's our daughter. We've always done everything she told us. I thought maybe it was true that someone would come get us." Mr. Harold, who had been quietly listening, suddenly stood up, agitated. "She sold our house, Dorothy. Sold our bakery. Where's our money?" "Calm down, Harold." Mrs. Dorothy tried to calm him, but Rachel noticed tears in her eyes. "Is it true?" asked Rachel. "They sold your things?" "The house was ours, yes. 40 years paying for it, it was ours. And the bakery, too. But about 2 years ago, when Harold started getting more confused, Sharon said it would be better to transfer everything to her name to make it easier when we needed medical care. We signed the papers because we trusted her. And then? Then she sold everything, said she would use the money to pay for a good nursing home for us, but no nursing home ever appeared. And when we asked, she said we were too difficult, that nobody wanted to take us in." Rachel felt her stomach churn. The story she was hearing was very different from the version their children had told on the phone. And Brian? Was he involved in this too? Brian was always weaker, does what his sister tells him. In recent months, he barely showed up at home. When he did, he was always asking to borrow money, said he would pay it back, but he never did. Ethan started crying and Rachel stood up to rock her son. As she walked around the small studio apartment, she tried to organize her thoughts. She had 3 adults and a baby in a tiny space, not enough money to feed everyone, and a complex family situation she didn't know how to solve. What bothered her most was the discrepancy between the versions. The children spoke of problematic and violent parents, but the elderly people she saw there seemed just tired and confused. Mr. Harold had moments of confusion, but also moments of clarity, and Mrs. Dorothy seemed completely lucid and oriented. "Mrs. Dorothy, can I ask a somewhat personal question?" "Of course, dear." "Mr. Harold, did he really hit you? Like Sharon said?" The elderly woman remained silent for a long time, looking at her husband, who had calmed down and was now fiddling with an old magazine he found on the table. "Harold never laid a finger on me in 50 years of marriage," she said finally with a firm voice. "He's always been the sweetest man in the world. After he started getting confused, sometimes he yells when he gets nervous or tries to leave the house in the middle of the night, but violent never." "Then why did she say that?" "Because it's easier on her conscience, right? If we were violent and problematic, she would feel justified in abandoning us. It's easier than admitting she did this because she wanted our money." The coldness in Mrs. Dorothy's voice as she said these words made Rachel realize that, despite the fragile appearance, there was a strong woman there. Someone who had been through much suffering, but hadn't lost her dignity or her ability to see reality as it was. The day passed slowly. Rachel shared with her guests the little food she had: rice, beans, and some eggs. She prepared a simple but warm meal. She watched with sadness as Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold ate voraciously, as if they hadn't eaten properly in days. Ethan slept in the makeshift crib, and Rachel wondered how she would manage to work the next day. She couldn't leave the 2 elderly people alone in the studio apartment, especially with Mr. Harold in a confused state. But she also couldn't miss work. Her financial situation was already too precarious. "Daughter," said Mrs. Dorothy, as if reading her thoughts, "you don't need to worry about us. Tomorrow morning we're leaving. We've already been too much trouble." "Where will you go?" "We'll manage. We've managed before." "Has this happened other times? You being homeless?" Mrs. Dorothy hesitated, then nodded. "A few times. When Sharon got very angry with us, she'd put us out for a few days. We'd sleep at some friends' houses, sometimes at the church entrance. But now we don't have any living friends left. And at the church, they don't allow sleeping inside anymore." Rachel felt a wave of indignation. How could children do this to their own parents? She thought of her own mother, who had left when she was a teenager, and how she still missed having a real family. And here were 2 people who had children, yet were completely abandoned. "You're not leaving," she said firmly. "I'll figure something out. Tomorrow I'll try to speak with social services, see if they can get some kind of help." "No, daughter. You've already done so much. You have your baby to care for, your life. We can't be a burden." "You're not a burden, and besides, my Ethan seems to be sleeping better with you here. I think he likes having more people around." It was true. Ethan, who usually cried a lot at night, had slept deeply since the elderly couple arrived. Perhaps the presence of more adults soothed him, even though he was so small. That night, Rachel gave up her bed for Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold and slept on the floor, on some towels. It wasn't comfortable, but neither was it the first time she'd slept in poor conditions. During the night, she woke several times to Mr. Harold talking to himself, but Mrs. Dorothy always managed to calm him with soft words. The next day, Rachel called work and said she had family problems. A lie, technically, but it didn't feel like a lie. Somehow those 2 strangers were starting to feel like family to her. She spent the whole day on the phone, trying to find some solution. She called the City Hall, Organizations for Elderly Assistance, the Public Defender's Office. Every place either had huge waiting lists, didn't meet the elderly couple's profile, or simply had no resources available. The situation became more complicated when Mrs. Barbara, the neighbor from next door, knocked on her door in the late afternoon. "Rachel, I need to talk with you." Mrs. Barbara was a 60-year-old retired woman who used to be polite but not very close. She entered the studio apartment and greeted Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold politely. "Look, Rachel, I don't want to seem like a bad person, but some neighbors are commenting about you bringing these people here. The superintendent is worried." "Worried about what?" "About the safety issue, you know. We don't know these people. And there's also the noise issue." The gentleman spoke loudly during the night. Rachel looked at Mr. Harold, who was sitting quietly, fiddling with an old photo he'd taken from his wallet. "He has memory problems, Mrs. Barbara. Sometimes he gets confused at night. But he's not violent or dangerous." "I understand, dear. But you have to understand our position, too. We have families here, small children. And another thing, legally you can't have people living here who aren't on the lease agreement." Rachel hadn't thought of that. Her lease specified that only she and Ethan could live in the studio. Having other residents could be grounds for eviction. "It's temporary, Mrs. Barbara, just until I find some solution for them." "I hope it really is, dear, because the superintendent said if the situation isn't resolved in a few days, he'll have to take action." After the neighbor left, Rachel felt even more pressured. Mrs. Dorothy, who had heard the whole conversation, approached her. "Dear, we didn't want to cause you any trouble. It's better if we leave." "No, I'll fix this. I just need a few more days." That night, Rachel barely managed to sleep. She kept calculating and recalculating her finances. Even with her cleaning job salary, she could hardly pay the rent and basic expenses for herself and Ethan. Adding 2 people to the equation was mathematically impossible. But the idea of putting the 2 elderly back on the street caused her physical anguish. On the 3rd day, the situation became unbearable when Rachel came home from work and found Mr. Harold alone in the studio apartment, crying and looking for Mrs. Dorothy. "Where is your wife, Mr. Harold?" "I don't know, miss. She left and hasn't come back. She said she was going to fix something, but it's been a long time. Did she get lost? Did someone hurt her?" The elderly man's despair was so genuine that Rachel felt her heart race. She picked up Ethan and went out with Mr. Harold to search for Mrs. Dorothy around the neighborhood. They found her 2 blocks away, sitting in a small park, clearly lost and disoriented. "Mrs. Dorothy, what happened?" The elderly woman looked up, and Rachel was startled to see how confused and fragile she looked. "Rachel? Oh, I'm glad you came. I went out to try to find our children, to talk to them in person. But I got lost. I couldn't remember where your house was. Are you okay? You seem a bit—" "I'm very tired, dear, and scared. When you're not here, I'm afraid someone will come and take us away by force, or that we'll have to leave and have nowhere to go." It was at that moment that Rachel realized how much the situation was affecting the 2 elderly psychologically. The insecurity and fear were making them more confused and vulnerable. "Let's go home," said Rachel, offering her arm to Mrs. Dorothy. "No one is going to take you away from there." But even as she spoke these words, Rachel knew she couldn't guarantee them. Her financial situation was deteriorating rapidly. She had missed 2 days of work, and her boss had already shown irritation. She couldn't keep missing work without consequences. That night, after the elderly had fallen asleep, Rachel stayed awake, trying to think of solutions. It was then that she had an idea that seemed absurd, but perhaps it was the only way out. What if she tried to find evidence that the children had actually stolen their parents' assets? If she could prove it, maybe she could reverse the situation legally. It was a desperate idea, but better than nothing. The next day, she talked to Mrs. Dorothy about her idea. "Did you keep any documents from the sale of the house and the bakery?" "I kept some papers, yes. They're in a box I left at Sharon's house when we moved there." "And is there a way for us to get those documents?" Mrs. Dorothy thought for a moment. "I can try calling her, say I need some medicine that was left there. Then maybe she'll let us in to get it." It was risky, but worth a try. Mrs. Dorothy called her daughter but got an answering machine. She left a message asking to pick up some important medications. Sharon returned the call 2 hours later, clearly irritated. "What do you want now?" "Dear, I need to get my heart medications. They were in the drawer of my bedroom dresser." "What medications? You don't take any heart medications." Mrs. Dorothy hesitated. It was true she didn't take heart medications. Rachel quickly whispered a suggestion. Oh dear, it's not mine. It's Harold's. For high blood pressure, the doctor said it's dangerous to go without. There was a pause on the other end of the line. All right, you can come get them this afternoon, but quickly because I won't be waiting around, and you're not coming inside the house. I'll bring the medications to the door. It wasn't ideal, but at least it was a chance to go to the house and maybe get some information. In the afternoon, Rachel left Ethan with a friendlier neighbor and accompanied the two elderly people to Sharon's house. The neighborhood was middle class with small but well-kept houses. Sharon's house was one of the largest on the street. Sharon greeted them at the door with a hostile expression. She was a woman of about 40, with black hair tied in a ponytail, wearing a nurse's uniform. She had features similar to her mother's, but her face was hardened by anger. "Here are the medicines," she said dryly, handing over a box of high blood pressure medication. "And now you can leave." "Dear," Mrs. Dorothy tried, "can we talk a little about our situation?" "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice when you left home. Now figure it out yourselves." "But we didn't leave," insisted Mrs. Dorothy. "You left us at the bus stop. I took you to a doctor's appointment and you ran away. Don't blame me for your irresponsibility." Rachel realized that Sharon had completely changed the story. She decided to intervene. "Sorry, Sharon, but your mother told me a different version. She said you left them at the bus stop and told them someone would come to pick them up." Sharon looked at Rachel as if seeing her for the first time. "And who are you to interfere in our family? A schemer trying to take advantage of two confused old people. I'm not taking advantage of anyone, just helping." "Helping?" Sharon laughed bitterly. "You think I don't know your game? First you pretend to help, then you'll want money, inheritance, who knows what. My parents might be confused, but I'm not stupid. I don't want anything from your parents except to see them well." "Of course not," Sharon said sarcastically, "and I'm the Queen of England. Look, whatever your scheme is, it won't work. My parents have nothing of value, and I won't give you a cent." "What about their house and the bakery?" Rachel asked directly. Sharon's expression changed slightly. For a second, she seemed unsure. "What house? What bakery? They've lived on rent their whole lives. They never had any property." "That's not true," said Mr. Harold, who had been quiet until then. "Our house, our bakery. I worked 40 years to buy all that." "Dad, you're confused again," said Sharon, but her tone had lost its aggressiveness and now had something Rachel interpreted as nervousness. "You never owned a house." "Harold, let's go," Mrs. Dorothy said softly. "It's no use talking." When they moved away from the house, Rachel noticed that Mrs. Dorothy was visibly shaken. "She lied about everything," the elderly woman said in a trembling voice. "How can a daughter lie like that to her own parents?" "Mrs. Dorothy, are you absolutely sure that you owned the house and the bakery?" "Of course I am, dear. I lived in that house for 20 years. I worked in the bakery every day for 15 years. How could I not remember?" "And is there any way to prove it? Some document that wasn't at Sharon's house?" Mrs. Dorothy thought for a moment. "Yes, there is. In the bakery there was a small safe behind the counter. I always kept a copy of the most important documents there. Maybe it's still there." "Does the bakery still exist?" "It does, but now it's a pharmacy. But the safe was built into the wall. If they didn't renovate that part, it was a remote possibility, but it was all they had." Rachel suggested they go there the next day. The old bakery was on a busy commercial street in the neighborhood. Now it was a modern pharmacy, looking like a big chain. Rachel entered with the two elderly people, pretending they were going to buy medicine. "Is Mr. Harold confused?" she whispered to Mrs. Dorothy while they looked at the medicines. "No, today he's lucid. Sometimes he's like this, remembers everything clearly." "Then I'll try to distract them while you look for the safe." Rachel approached the pharmacist and began asking detailed questions about baby medications, keeping him busy. Meanwhile, Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold headed to the back of the pharmacy. A few minutes later, they returned. Mrs. Dorothy gave a discreet signal to Rachel. They had found something. They left the pharmacy and went to a nearby square. Mrs. Dorothy pulled a sealed, yellowed envelope from her bag. "It was there," she said with relief. The safe was somewhat hidden by a new shelf, but it was still there. They opened the envelope and found copies of deeds, both for the house and the bakery shop, documents showing paid-off loans. And, most importantly, copies of the property transfer papers that Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold had signed 2 years earlier. Rachel examined the papers. She didn't understand much about legal matters, but one thing was clear. The elderly couple had indeed owned significant assets, and they had transferred everything to Sharon's name. "This proves you were telling the truth," said Rachel, "but it also proves you really signed over the properties." "That's true," admitted Mrs. Dorothy. "But she said it was just to make things easier when we needed medical care, that the money would be used to pay for a good place for us to live." "And do you have any way to prove she said that?" Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold exchanged glances. "No," Mrs. Dorothy said sadly. "We signed trusting her word." Rachel felt disheartened. The documents proved the elderly had been deceived, but not necessarily that it was illegal. If they had voluntarily signed the transfer, even based on broken promises, there might be no legal recourse. But at least now she was sure that Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold were telling the truth. They really had been abandoned by their own children after having their assets taken. Back at the studio apartment, Rachel felt more determined to help. She didn't know how, but she would find a way to resolve that situation. It was then that Ethan started to get sick. It began with a low-grade fever in the early morning. Rachel, used to her son's minor health issues, wasn't initially worried, but during the morning, the fever rose, and Ethan became very lethargic. "Honey, this boy isn't well," said Mrs. Dorothy, touching the baby's forehead. "He's very hot." Rachel called the health clinic, but could only get an appointment for the next day. Ethan's fever was high, and he cried continuously. "I'm taking him to the emergency room," said Rachel, grabbing her bag. "I'll go with you," said Mrs. Dorothy. "No need, you stay here with Mr. Harold. Harold will be fine alone for a few hours, and I know about sick children. I raised 4 kids and worked as a midwife for years." Rachel didn't know Mrs. Dorothy had been a midwife. Once again, she realized how little she knew about these people's past. At the hospital, the wait was long and distressing. Ethan cried inconsolably, and his temperature wouldn't go down. Rachel was desperate when Mrs. Dorothy suggested something. "Honey, I'll teach you a technique that always worked with my children. It doesn't replace the doctor, but it might help bring the fever down while we wait." Mrs. Dorothy asked the receptionist for a basin of warm water and some towels. With expert movements, she began applying compresses to the baby, gently massaging certain points. "It's a technique I learned from my grandmother, who was a healer," she explained. "There's nothing supernatural about it. It's just knowledge about the human body that was passed down through generations." To Rachel's surprise, the technique worked. Ethan calmed down, and his temperature began to drop slightly. When they were finally seen by the doctor, the baby was noticeably better. "It's just a virus," said the pediatrician after examining Ethan. "With plenty of fluids and rest, he'll be fine. You did right by using the compresses. It's an old technique, but effective." Back at home, Rachel looked at Mrs. Dorothy with renewed admiration. "You saved my son today." "I didn't save anything, dear. I just helped a little. That's what we do in family, right? We help each other." The word family kept echoing in Rachel's head. It was strange how, in just a few days, these 2 strangers had become more family to her than anyone in her life. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, after Ethan fell asleep peacefully, Rachel made a decision. She couldn't keep supporting 3 additional people for much longer, but she also couldn't just abandon Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold. She would try a different approach. "Mrs. Dorothy, tomorrow I'm going to look for a lawyer. I want to see if there's a way to reverse this property transfer, or at least get some compensation for you. Dear, lawyers are expensive. You can't spend your money on that. I'll look for the public defender's office. It's free. And if it doesn't work, we'll think of something else, but at least I'll have tried." The next morning, Rachel missed work once again. She knew she was risking being fired, but at that moment, helping the elderly seemed more important than anything else. The public defender's office was in the city center. Rachel carried Ethan in her arms and accompanied the 2 elderly people on the long bus ride. The line for service was huge, and they waited almost 3 hours. When they were finally seen, the public defender, a young man who was clearly overwhelmed, listened to their story with a skeptical expression. "Look, your case is complicated," he said after examining the documents. "Technically, there was a legal transfer of assets. You signed voluntarily." "But she lied about what she was going to do with the money," protested Rachel. "That would be a matter of bad faith, but it's very difficult to prove in court. It would be your word against your daughter's. And considering that—" he hesitated, looking at Mr. Harold. "Considering there are mental capacity issues involved. Mr. Harold has moments of confusion, but also many moments of clarity," said Rachel. "And Mrs. Dorothy is perfectly lucid." "Yes, but the defense will argue that both were incapacitated at the time of signing. It's a very difficult case to win." "So there's nothing we can do?" The lawyer sighed. "I can try to file a lawsuit questioning the transfer, but I'll be honest, the chances of success are small, and the process could take years." "Years?" "Yes, and during that time, you'll need a place to live and support. Can you manage?" Rachel looked at the two elderly people, then at Ethan sleeping in her arms. The reality of the situation was becoming clearer and more desperate. "We'll think about it," she said finally. Back at home, the mood was heavy. Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold seemed resigned, as if they already knew there was no easy way out of their situation. "Dear," said Mrs. Dorothy when they arrived at the studio apartment, "Harold and I talked on the bus. We're leaving tomorrow morning. We've already taken too much advantage of your kindness." "You're not going anywhere," said Rachel firmly. "I'll figure something out." "What way, dear? You heard what the lawyer said. There's no legal way to fix this, and you can't support us forever. I can at least support you for a few more days, until we find a solution." But that night, Rachel received a call that changed everything. "Rachel? This is Mrs. Margaret, your boss. I need to talk to you." Rachel felt her stomach turn to ice. Mrs. Margaret was the hospital cleaning supervisor, a strict but fair woman. "Hi, Mrs. Margaret. I was going to call tomorrow to explain—" "Rachel, you've missed 4 days in 2 weeks. I know you're a good employee, but I can't accept this. Either you show up tomorrow without fail, or I'll have to replace you." "I understand, Mrs. Margaret. It's just that I have a complicated family situation." "Everyone has family situations, Rachel, but work can't stop because of that. You need to decide your priorities." After hanging up the phone, Rachel sat at the small kitchen table and buried her face in her hands. She was between a rock and a hard place. If she kept missing work, she'd be fired and wouldn't be able to support herself or Ethan, let alone the two elderly people. But if she went back to work, what would she do with Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold? It was Mr. Harold who, surprisingly, offered a solution. "Miss," he said, sitting next to Rachel, "I heard you talking on the phone. It's about work, right?" "Yes, Mr. Harold. I'm not that confused, you know. There are days when I remember everything, understand everything, and today is one of those days." Rachel lifted her head and looked at him. His eyes were clear and attentive. "What was your profession again, Mr. Harold?" "I was an accountant before opening the bakery. I worked in an accounting office for 20 years, and even when I ran the bakery, I did all the bookkeeping, taxes, those things myself." "And Mrs. Dorothy?" "Dorothy, besides being a midwife, always helped with the administrative part of the bakery, and she raised 4 children practically alone. We're not useless just because we're old, you know." Rachel realized where he was going with this. "You want to take care of Ethan while I work?" "If you trust us, yes. Dorothy understands children better than any nanny you could pay, and I can help with whatever is needed. But what if you get confused? When I get confused, Dorothy takes care of me too, and it's usually at night when you're here. During the day, I'm better." The proposal made sense, but Rachel had to admit to herself that she was scared. What if something happened to Ethan while she was away? What if Mr. Harold had an episode of confusion and did something dangerous? "Let me think about the idea," said Rachel. "Of course, dear, but think quickly, because you need to work tomorrow." That night, Rachel hardly slept. She watched Mrs. Dorothy care for Ethan with confident and affectionate gestures. The elderly woman seemed to have very sharp maternal instincts, and Ethan clearly liked her. Several times when the baby cried, Mrs. Dorothy managed to calm him down faster than Rachel herself. In the morning, Rachel made her decision. "All right," she said to the two elderly people, "let's give it a try, but there are some rules." "Go ahead," said Mrs. Dorothy. "If Mr. Harold starts to get confused, you call me immediately. And if there's any emergency with Ethan, don't hesitate to call the neighbor or call me." "Don't worry, dear." Rachel got ready for work with a heavy heart. Leaving Ethan with people she had known for only a few days seemed crazy, but she had no choice. Before leaving, she gave her son a kiss and whispered detailed instructions to Mrs. Dorothy. "If he gets a fever again, do the compresses you taught me. There's formula in the fridge, and call me if you need anything. Go in peace, dear. Ethan is in good hands." Throughout the workday, Rachel called home every 2 hours. She always received reassuring reports. Ethan had fed well, slept at the right times, played with Mrs. Dorothy. Mr. Harold was lucid and had helped by giving the baby a bottle. When she returned from work in the late afternoon, she found a scene that surprised her. Ethan was in Mr. Harold's lap, who was softly singing an old song. Mrs. Dorothy had prepared a simple but fragrant soup, and the studio apartment was tidier than ever. "How was your day?" asked Rachel, picking up Ethan. "It was great," said Mrs. Dorothy. "This boy is an angel, and Harold was lucid all day. He helped a lot." "I did some calculations for your house," said Mr. Harold, showing a paper with numbers written on it. "If we divide the expenses properly, and if I can get some accounting gigs, we might manage to stay together." Rachel took the paper and examined the calculations. Mr. Harold had made a detailed budget, including all household expenses and some possibilities for extra income. It was ambitious but not impossible. "Do you really think you can find work?" "Well, why not? I know how to do accounting. There are many small business owners out there who need help with taxes and such, but can't afford an expensive office. I can do it from home for a cheaper price." The idea was tempting, but Rachel still had doubts. "And when you get confused?" "Then Dorothy helps me or I stop working that day. We'll manage." That night, for the first time since the elderly had arrived, Rachel felt hopeful. Maybe there really was a way to make this situation work. But the hope didn't last long. 2 days later, when Rachel returned from work, she found the door to the studio apartment wide open and no one inside. For a moment, she thought they had been robbed. Then she saw a note on the table. "Rachel, we took the elderly to where they should be. Don't meddle in matters that aren't your business, Brian and Sharon." Rachel felt the world spin. She ran to the bedroom, but there was no sign of a struggle. The few belongings of the elderly had disappeared, but nothing valuable had been taken. Where was Ethan? Desperate, she ran to her neighbor, Mrs. Barbara's apartment. "Mrs. Barbara, did you see what happened in my apartment?" "Oh, Rachel, I'm glad you're here. 2 people came to pick up the elderly this morning. They said they were their children. They took them away." "And my son? Where is my son?" "Oh, that's strange. I thought you knew. The lady left the baby with me, said you would pick him up later. He's here." Rachel rushed to get Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully on Mrs. Barbara's sofa. At least her son was safe. But where were Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold? "Did you see if they were forced to leave? Did they seem scared?" "No, they seemed normal. The old man was a bit confused, asking where they were going, but the old lady said it was fine, that it was better this way." Rachel returned to her studio apartment carrying Ethan, feeling lost and helpless. She tried calling Sharon and Brian's numbers, but both were out of service. She stayed up all night imagining what could have happened. Were Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold okay? Had they gone voluntarily, or had they been coerced? In the morning, she decided to try to find them. She went to Sharon's house, but no one was there. The neighbors said she had left early with a suitcase. She tried the public defender's office again, but the lawyer was straightforward. "If they went with their own children voluntarily, there's nothing we can do. Legally, the children have more right to care for their parents than a stranger. But what if they didn't go voluntarily? Then it would be a matter for the police. But you would have to prove coercion or false imprisonment, which is very difficult." Rachel felt completely powerless. She had grown fond of the 2 elderly people more than she thought possible. They had become part of her makeshift family, and now they had disappeared without a trace. The following days were difficult. Ethan cried more, as if he missed the presence of Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold. Rachel also felt lonely in the studio apartment that suddenly seemed too big and too empty. A week later, she received an unexpected visit. It was Brian, the youngest son of Mrs. Dorothy. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, looking nervous. "Where are your parents?" said Rachel directly. "That's what I want to talk about. Can I come in?" Rachel let him in but stayed alert. Brian seemed different from what she had imagined from the phone conversations. He was younger than she expected, maybe in his early 30s, and seemed genuinely troubled. "Where are they?" repeated Rachel. "In a nursing home out in the country. My sister found a place that would take them." "How are they doing?" Brian hesitated before answering. "Not too well, actually. That's why I came to talk to you." "What do you mean?" "That place. It's not very good. It's cheap, you know. And my dad isn't adjusting. He gets very agitated, wants to leave all the time, and my mum, she's very sad." Rachel felt a mix of anger and worry. "So why did you take them there?" "Because my sister said it was the only option, that we couldn't leave them with you, that you were a stranger, that we had to take responsibility." "And you took responsibility by putting them in a bad place." "It wasn't supposed to be bad. Sharon said it was a decent place. But when I went to visit them yesterday," Brian paused, visibly emotional, "my mum asked about you, wanted to know if you and the baby were okay. And my dad cried when I said they couldn't come back here." Rachel felt tears in her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think we made a mistake. My sister, she's been angry with my parents for a long time. Because of money, you know. She thinks they spent too much, that they didn't save enough for their old age. And when they became more dependent, she got even more annoyed. And you, what's your opinion?" "I don't really know. I was very young when my parents still had the bakery and all that. I always believed Sharon's version, that they were irresponsible with money. But after seeing them with you..." "What about me?" "They were different with you. More happy. My mom smiled more in the few days she stayed with you than in the last 2 years. And my dad, he seemed more lucid too." Rachel didn't know what to say. It was gratifying to hear that, but also painful to know that Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold were suffering far away. "What do you want from me, Brian?" "I wanted to ask you a favor. Could you visit them? I think they would be happy to see you." "Where is this nursing home?" "In Yonkers. It's far, I know, but can you take me there?" Brian seemed surprised by the response. "You would really go?" "Of course. They became important to me too. So, do you want to go now?" "I came by car." Rachel looked at Ethan, then at Brian. It was risky to trust him, but her concern for the elderly was greater than any fear. "Let's go." The trip to Yonkers took almost 2 hours in traffic. During the ride, Brian told more about the family dynamics. "My sister has always been the stronger one of us two. When our parents started getting older, she took care of everything. I trusted her decisions because I thought she knew what she was doing. And now I don't know anymore. When I saw my parents in that place, I realized that maybe Sharon hadn't thought about their well-being, only about our convenience." The nursing home was on a street away from the city center. It was an old building with an air of neglect, surrounded by a high wall. It didn't look welcoming at all. "Brian," said Rachel when they got out of the car, "this place looks terrible." "I know. That's why I wanted you to see it." They entered the reception where a grumpy employee greeted them. "Visiting hours are only on Sundays," she said curtly. "We're family," lied Brian. "It's just a quick visit." The employee led them down a poorly lit hallway to a common room where several elderly people were sitting, most appearing medicated. Rachel spotted Mrs. Dorothy sitting alone in a corner, looking out the window. "Mrs. Dorothy," she called softly. The elderly woman turned, and her face lit up when she saw Rachel. "My dear, you came to see me." She stood up and hugged Rachel tightly. "Where's Ethan?" "He's here," said Rachel, showing the baby. "How are you?" "Not too well, dear. This place isn't very good. And Harold is worse. They give him a lot of medicine to keep him quiet." "Where is he?" "In a separate room. They said he was too agitated. Brian spoke with the employee and got permission to see Mr. Harold. They found him in a small windowless room, lying on a narrow bed, clearly under heavy sedatives. "Harold?" called Mrs. Dorothy gently. "Look who came to see you." Mr. Harold opened his eyes with difficulty and focused on Rachel. It took him a few seconds to recognize her. "The young lady, with the baby," he murmured with a slurred voice. "Yes, Mr. Harold. I came to see you. I want to leave," he said, trying to sit up. "I don't like it here." A nurse appeared and said visiting hours were over. Rachel had to say goodbye to the two elderly people, promising she'd return soon, but knowing she couldn't easily keep that promise. Back in the car, Brian was visibly shaken. "I didn't know it was like this," he said. "Sharon said it was a good place." "Did your sister see this place before bringing them here?" "I don't know. She made the arrangements. She said it was the only place that fit our budget." "What budget? Didn't your parents have the money from the sale of the house and the bakery?" Brian was silent for a long time. "Brian, where is that money?" "Sharon said she used it all to pay off our parents' debts and cover the first few months of the nursing home." "What debts?" "I don't know. She handled those things." Rachel began to understand. Brian probably knew nothing about his parents' actual financial situation. Sharon had manipulated the information and made all the decisions. "Brian, do you have access to your parents' financial documents?" "No. Everything stays with Sharon." "Would you like to know the truth about their money?" Brian looked at her with an uncertain expression. "Do you think something's wrong?" "I think a lot is wrong. And I think your sister deceived you as much as she deceived your parents." During the return trip, Rachel told Brian the whole story she had heard from Mrs. Dorothy, including the discovery of the documents in the old bakery. Brian grew increasingly disturbed as he listened. "Are you saying my sister stole from our parents?" "I'm saying she used their money very differently than she promised, and that maybe you also have a right to know what happened to that money. But if it's true, what can I do? First, we need to get your parents out of that awful place. Then we can try to uncover the truth about the money. But I can't take care of them. I live in a small house with my wife and 2 kids, and I don't have money to pay for a better nursing home. Then we find out where the money is that should be paying for a better nursing home." Brian became thoughtful. "What do you suggest?" "That you confront your sister. Ask to see the financial documents. If she refuses or avoids it, we'll go after the documents through other means." "And if we find out she really stole?" "She's my sister." "Brian, your parents are your family too, and they're suffering in that place, while your sister might be living with the money that should be taking care of them." When they arrived back in Hope District, Brian was determined. "I'll talk to Sharon today," he said. Could you come with me to give me moral support?" Rachel hesitated. She didn't want to get more involved in a family fight, but she also couldn't abandon Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold. "All right, but let's take it easy. No direct accusations at first. Just asking for clarifications." They went to Sharon's house in the late afternoon. This time she received them with less hostility, perhaps because her brother was with them. "Brian, what a surprise. You brought her here for what?" "Sharon, I visited our parents today. That place isn't right." "What do you mean it isn't right?" "It's a decent, clean place. They're drugging Dad to keep him quiet, and Mom is very sad. Brian, they need medication. Dad was getting violent." "Violent how?" interrupted Rachel. "I spent a week with them and never saw Mr. Harold be violent." "Of course you never saw it," said Sharon irritably. "You stayed with them for a week. I lived with them for 2 years. I know how they are." "Sharon," said Brian, "I want to see our parents' financial documents. I want to understand how the money from the house and the bakery is being used." Sharon's expression changed immediately. "Why do you want to see that?" "You never cared about the family's financial matters before." "Because now I care. I want to know if there really isn't a way to pay for a better place for them." "Brian, the money ran out. I already explained that to you. They had debts, medical expenses. What debts? What medical expenses? Sharon, said Rachel, if there really is no money left, it doesn't hurt to show the documents. It will clarify everything. Who are you to ask for my family's documents? Sharon turned to Rachel angrily. You have nothing to do with this. Maybe I don't have a legal right, said Rachel calmly, but I have an emotional interest. Your parents have become important to me. Important why? You've known them for 2 weeks. Sometimes 2 weeks can be more meaningful than 20 years, depending on how you treat people. The tension in the air was palpable. Sharon was visibly irritated and defensive, which only increased Rachel's suspicions. Sharon, insisted Brian, please, I just want to see the papers. The papers are in the office. I can show you another day. Why not today? Because I don't have time. And besides, you wouldn't understand any of it anyway. You never understood money. Then explain it to me. How much did that awful place where you put our parents cost? Sharon hesitated before answering. $1,200 a month. For each? No, total. For both of them. Rachel and Brian exchanged glances. That amount was very low even for a poor-quality nursing home. And how much would a better place cost? Asked Rachel. Much more than we have, Sharon replied curtly. How much? Insisted Brian. About $3,000–4,000 a month, each. Brian did the math mentally. You mean for $8,000 a month our parents could be in a decent place? Yeah, but we don't have $8,000 a month. Sharon, how much money came from the sale of the house and the bakery? Silence. Sharon, I don't remember exactly. It was 2 years ago. But it must have been a lot, right? The house was big, well located, and the bakery had a good commercial spot. Things weren't worth as much as you think. Everything was very old, needed renovations. How much? Brian was losing patience. Brian, why are you interrogating me like this? You never questioned anything before. What did this woman tell you? She didn't tell me anything. I'm the one who saw our parents in that horrible place and started questioning things. The argument was getting more tense. Rachel realized that Sharon was feeling cornered and that this could make things worse for everyone. Guys, let's take it easy, said Rachel. Sharon, Brian just wants to understand the situation. If you're siblings, it's normal for him to want to know about your parents' finances. Normal? Sharon laughed bitterly. Normal would have been him helping me take care of our parents for the last 2 years, instead of showing up now wanting to give his opinion. You're right, said Brian. I should have helped more. But now I want to help, and for that, I need to understand the financial situation. The situation is simple. There's no money. It's gone. And now they're in a place that fits our budget. But Sharon, if there's no money, how did you manage to do renovations on your house? Asked Rachel, risking an observation. When I was here last week, I noticed everything looked quite new. The silence that followed was tense. Sharon looked at Rachel with pure hatred. How dare you? Sharon, Brian seemed to be starting to understand. Did you use our parents' money to renovate your house? It's not like that. I invested in a renovation that increased the property's value. If I ever sell, I'll pay back the money with interest. Sharon, you used the money that was supposed to be taking care of our parents to renovate your house. Brian, you don't understand how these things work. Sometimes you have to make investments. Sharon, Brian was shouting now, our parents are suffering in that terrible place while you're living in a house renovated with their money. It's not exactly like that. How is it not? Explain to me how it's not. Rachel realized the situation was getting out of control. Sharon was cornered and might do something desperate. Brian, let's talk about this calmly, another time. No, said Brian. I want to talk now. Sharon, where's the rest of the money? What rest? There is no rest. Sharon, a house and a commercial property couldn't have only given enough money for a renovation. Where's the rest? Sharon looked from Brian to Rachel, clearly desperate. You won't rest until you destroy me, will you? Nobody wants to destroy you, said Rachel softly. We just want your parents to have a decent place to live. Decent place? Sharon laughed hysterically. Do you know how much a decent place costs? Do you know how much I spent taking care of them over the last 2 years? Tell us, said Brian. Medications, doctor's appointments, renovations to the house to accommodate them when they came to live with me. A caregiver when I had to work, and all that came out of my pocket. And the money from the sale of their assets? It's gone. I spent it all taking care of them. In how long? What do you mean? How long did it take to spend all the money? Brian was being relentless now. Sharon fell silent. Sharon, how much money was it? I don't remember. How can you not remember? It was 2 years ago. Brian, I don't have to answer to you. You never helped me with anything. Now you show up here wanting to judge me. I'm not judging you, I just want to understand. You want to understand? Then I'll explain it to you. Sharon was clearly beside herself now. Yes, I used part of the money on my house, because I was the one who would have to take care of them for the rest of my life. I had the right to have decent living conditions too. Part? What part? Most of it, okay? I used most of it. Sharon. And there was still enough left to pay for that nursing home for 2 years. 2 years, Brian, that's not a small amount of money. 2 years at $1,200 a month is less than $30,000, Brian quickly calculated. How much money was there in total? Silence again. Sharon, how much money was it? $250,000. Brian turned pale. $250,000? Yes. And you spent over $200,000 on your house? No. I also spent it on medical care, medications, adaptations. How much? Brian, stop interrogating me. How much, Sharon? $100,000 on the house, $50,000 on medical care and adaptations, and the rest for the 2 years at the nursing home. Brian did the math. Don't close the account, Sharon. 100 plus 50 plus 30. That's 180. 70,000 is missing. There are other expenses you don't know about. What expenses? Brian, I don't have to... Sharon, where are the $70,000? The question echoed through the house. Sharon began to cry. I had to use some for a few personal emergencies. What emergencies? The credit card was maxed out. I had overdue loans. You paid your personal debts with our parents' money? It wasn't like that. I was going to put the money back. How? With what money? I thought I would get a better job, that I would be able to pay it back. Brian sat down in a chair, visibly shocked. Rachel approached him. Brian, are you okay? I can't believe it, he murmured. $250,000. Our parents could have lived well for years with that money. Brian, said Sharon, still crying, I swear I was going to pay it back, and I took care of them for 2 years. That has to count for something too. Taking care isn't charging, Sharon. Taking care is what you do out of love. Love? Sharon became furious again. Where was your love when I was cleaning up Daddy's poop? Where was your love when Mommy woke up screaming in the middle of the night? Where were you when I needed help? Brian had no answer for that. Rachel realized the situation was more complex than she had imagined. Sharon really had taken care of their parents, even if poorly, while Brian had been absent. But that didn't justify stealing their money. Sharon, said Rachel, what do you think we should do now? I don't know, she said, wiping her tears. I have no way to pay back the money. I used it all. Then we'll have to find another solution, said Brian, because I'm not leaving our parents in that horrible place. What other solution? Are you going to take them to your house? If I have to. With 2 small children and in a 2-bedroom house. Brian, be realistic. Then we'll sell your house and use the money to pay for a decent nursing home for the rest of their lives. This is my house. I worked my whole life to have my own house. With our parents' money, Sharon. The argument was turning into a pointless shouting match. Rachel decided to intervene. Guys, fighting won't solve anything. Let's think of practical solutions. What solutions? Asked Brian. First, let's get your parents out of that place. They can stay at my house temporarily until we figure something out. In your tiny studio, said Sharon, with a baby. With a... It's small, but it's better than that place where they are. And then? Asked Brian. Then we'll go to court. Sharon will have to pay back at least part of the money, even if it means selling the house. And you'll have to take on part of the responsibility for caring for your parents too. I don't have the financial means. I'm not just talking about money, Brian. I'm talking about time, presence, affection. Sharon may have stolen their money, but you abandoned them emotionally. Both siblings fell silent, digesting Rachel's words. And you? Asked Sharon. Why are you getting involved in all this? What do you get out of it? Rachel thought about the question. Really? What did she gain by getting involved in this mess? I get nothing, she finally answered, except knowing that I'm doing the right thing. Your parents helped me when I needed it. Now it's my turn to help them. That doesn't make sense, said Sharon. You've known them for 2 weeks. Sometimes 2 weeks of affection are worth more than 20 years of obligation, said Rachel, echoing the words she had said before. Brian stood up. I'm picking them up tomorrow, he said decisively. With or without your help, Sharon. And then? What are you going to do with them? I'll take them to Rachel's house until we sort this out. Brian, be realistic. You can't support 2 elderly people indefinitely. Sharon, you'll have to face the consequences of what you did. If that means selling your house and using the money to care for our parents, then that's what's going to happen. And if I refuse, then we'll go to court. With all those documents Rachel found, and with your own confession today, I don't think you have much chance of winning. Sharon looked from one to the other, realizing she was cornered. All right, she said finally. I'll help get them out of there, and I'll think of a solution for the money. Not think, said Brian. I'll want a concrete solution in a week. When they left Sharon's house, Brian was visibly shaken. Rachel, I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me for anything. I just hope we can resolve this situation. Do you think we can? I think so. Your sister knows she's in the wrong. And now that you know the truth, she can't manipulate the situation anymore. I feel so stupid for having believed her all these years. Brian, you trusted your sister. That doesn't make you stupid, it makes you a person of good faith. And now, how are we going to support our parents? One thing at a time. First, we get them out of that place. Then, we sort out the financial issues. The next day, Brian and Rachel returned to Yonkers. This time they found Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold in even worse condition. Mrs. Dorothy seemed to have lost weight, and Mr. Harold was even more sedated. We've come to take them, Brian said to the receptionist. Where are you taking them? Home, said Rachel. You'll need medical clearance and authorization from the financial responsible party. I'm the son, said Brian, and I have authorization. A lie, but it worked. An hour later, they were in the car heading back to New York. Mrs. Dorothy was crying with relief, and Mr. Harold, though confused, seemed calmer. Thank you, my dear, said Mrs. Dorothy, holding Rachel's hand. Thank you for not giving up on us. I'll never give up on you, Mrs. Dorothy. And in that moment, Rachel realized it was true. Those 2 elderly people had truly become her family, a chosen family, based on love and not blood. Back in the studio apartment, the situation was tight, but much happier. Ethan had stayed with the friendly neighbor during Rachel's absence, but was visibly joyful when he saw Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold. He missed you, said Rachel, handing the baby to Mrs. Dorothy. We missed him too, said the elderly woman, kissing Ethan's forehead. And you, my dear. That night, while everyone slept squeezed into the small studio, Rachel lay awake thinking about the future. They had a week to resolve the financial situation. After that, they would have to find a permanent solution. But for the first time since it all began, Rachel felt optimistic. They had documents proving Sharon's theft. They had Brian as an ally. And most importantly, they had enough love to overcome any difficulty. The next morning, Brian showed up early with news. I talked to my wife about the situation. She agrees that we have to help our parents. And she suggested something. What if we renovated our house to accommodate them? With the money Sharon will have to return, we could build an extension, create a proper room. You would do that? Rachel, I spent years shirking my responsibility to care for my parents. Now it's time to step up. And Sharon? Did she agree to return the money? I haven't spoken to her today yet, but she has no choice. At that moment, Brian's phone rang. It was Sharon. Brian, can you come over? I want to talk about yesterday. Now? Now. It's important. Brian looked at Rachel. Will you come with me? He asked. I will. They left Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold watching Ethan and went to Sharon's house. She greeted them with a different expression, calmer but also resigned. "Brian, I spent the whole night thinking about what we talked about yesterday. And? And you're right, I was wrong, with our parents and with you." Brian seemed surprised by the admission. "Sharon, let me speak. I've been angry at our parents for a long time, angry that they didn't plan better for their old age, angry that I had to take care of them alone. And when the opportunity came to use their money to improve my life, I thought it was fair. Sharon, they trusted you. I know, and I betrayed that trust. But Brian, I was desperate too. I was drowning in debt, about to lose my house, about to lose everything. And now? Now I want to do the right thing. I'm going to put my house up for sale." Brian fell silent, processing the information. "Are you sure?" "I am. With the money from the sale, we can pay for a good nursing home for our parents for the rest of their lives, and there will still be some left for me to start over somewhere smaller." "Sharon, you don't have to sell your house. If you return some of the money, we can figure out a way to take care of them." "Brian, there will be 80,000 reais left at most. It won't last long." Rachel, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, decided to speak. "What if there's a third option?" The two siblings looked at her. "What option?" "What if both of you moved into a bigger house together with your parents? Sharon sells this house, Brian sells his, and with the money you buy a house where everyone can live together?" "All together." Brian seemed skeptical. "All together. A big house where your parents have space and dignity, but also have family nearby. You share the responsibilities of care and you share the costs too." Sharon and Brian exchanged glances. "Would that be possible?" asked Sharon. "It would be cheaper than paying for a good nursing home," said Rachel, "and your parents would be with family, not strangers." "But Sharon and we don't get along very well," said Brian. "Maybe it's time for you to learn to get along," suggested Rachel, "for your parents." The idea hung in the air. Sharon was the first to speak. "Brian, would you be willing?" "I would if you would, and if you really changed your attitude toward our parents." "I would change. I swear I would. This week away from them made me realize how important they are to me, despite all the problems." "Then let's try," said Brian. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing." The next few days were intense. Sharon put her house up for sale and Brian started evaluating his. They consulted real estate agencies about larger houses in middle-class neighborhoods that would meet everyone's needs. Meanwhile, in Rachel's studio apartment, a family routine began to take shape. Mrs. Dorothy took care of Ethan with a grandmother's dedication, while Mr. Harold, in his moments of clarity, helped with small tasks and talked with Rachel about life. "Dear," Mrs. Dorothy said one afternoon, "you know we'll never forget what you did for us. Mrs. Dorothy, you've done a lot for me too. You showed me what a real family is." "We could be a real family," said Mr. Harold in a moment of clarity. "You, the baby, me and Dorothy. We get along." Rachel smiled, but also felt a pang in her heart. She knew that when Brian and Sharon resolved their situation, Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold would leave, and she would go back to being a single mother alone in a studio apartment that was too small. "Mr. Harold, you'll always be my family," she said, "even if you live far away." "Who said we're going to live far away?" said Mrs. Dorothy with a mysterious smile. "What do you mean?" "Brian came to talk to me this morning when you were working. He wants you to be our official caregiver." "What do you mean, official caregiver?" "They'll pay you a salary to take care of us, a better salary than what you earn as a cleaner." Rachel was speechless. "But what about Ethan and my life?" "Ethan comes along, of course, and your life will continue, just in a bigger house, with more people who care about you." The offer was tempting, but Rachel had concerns. "What if you move far away?" "We'll only move if it's to a place near your studio apartment, so you can stay close to your friends, your neighborhood." That evening, Brian called to confirm the offer. "Rachel, I know it's a lot to ask, but you saved my family. If you accept being my parents' caregiver, you'll be helping everyone." "Brian, I don't even know how to be an official caregiver. You already are. You've taken care of them better than any professional we tried to hire, and they trust you. How much can you pay? Brian mentioned an amount that was almost double what Rachel earned as a cleaner. And will I have days off? Of course. Sharon and I will take turns on weekends and at night. You won't be a slave, you'll be part of the family. Rachel didn't give her answer right away. She wanted to think, to evaluate if it was really a good decision for her and for Ethan. 2 days later, Brian showed up with news about the houses. We found a perfect house, he said excitedly. It has 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a big yard. It's only 10 blocks from here. How much does it cost? With the sale of the 2 houses, there's money left to buy it and still make some adaptations for our parents. What kind of adaptations? Support bars in the bathrooms, a ramp at the entrance, a bedroom on the ground floor, so they don't have to climb stairs. The house Brian showed Rachel was truly perfect. Large, well lit, with a garden where Ethan could play when he grew up. There was a bedroom that would be perfect for Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold, and another where Rachel and Ethan could stay. What do you think? Asked Brian. I think you've thought of everything, admitted Rachel. So do you accept? Rachel looked out the window of the future house, imagining Mrs. Dorothy tending to plants in the garden, Mr. Harold sitting on the porch reading the newspaper, Ethan playing on the lawn. I accept, she said finally. The move was quick. In 3 weeks the houses were sold, the new house bought and adapted. Rachel left the tiny studio apartment where she had spent such difficult times and moved into what seemed like a palace in comparison. On the first day in the new house, everyone was nervous. Would it work out? Would Brian and Sharon really be able to get along? Would Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold adjust? The first weeks were about adjustments. Brian worked outside but came home in the late afternoon and helped with his parents. Sharon had gotten a part-time job as a nurse and was home in the mornings, sharing the care with Rachel. Surprisingly, the arrangement worked well. Sharon had really changed, more patient, more caring with her parents. Brian was making an effort to make up for years of neglect. You know what I find funniest? Mrs. Dorothy said to Rachel one afternoon. What? My children are getting along better now than when they were kids. It seems like taking care of us brought them closer. It was true. Brian and Sharon had overcome years of hurt and misunderstandings by working together for their parents' well-being. Mr. Harold was having fewer and fewer episodes of confusion. The calm, loving environment of the new house seemed to be good for his condition. In moments of clarity, he helped Rachel take care of Ethan and shared stories from his life. Ethan was thriving in the new house. With more space and more people to love him, the baby was happier and more sociable. Mrs. Dorothy had become a second mother to him, and he had become the grandson she never had the chance to properly raise. Rachel, said Brian one evening, 6 months after the move, I want to tell you something. Go ahead. When all this started, I thought you were trying to pull a scam on us. I thought you wanted to take money from us. I know. Your sister made that very clear. But now I realize you saved our family. Not just our parents, but me and Sharon too. If you hadn't intervened, we would have ended up destroying each other. Brian, I just did what I thought was right. And that's what made all the difference. You did what you thought was right, even when it was hard, even when you had nothing to gain. That night, Rachel lay in her comfortable room, listening to Ethan breathing peacefully in the crib beside her bed, and felt a deep gratitude. Her life had completely changed since that cold morning when she found 2 elderly people abandoned at a bus stop. Now she had a large and loving family, a job that made sense, a big and comfortable house. But more important than all that, she had discovered that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, not the ones we're born into. 1 year later, the family's routine was well established. Mrs. Dorothy helped take care of Ethan, who was already starting to take his first steps. Mr. Harold had improved so much that he could do small accounting jobs for neighbors, feeling useful again. Brian was promoted at work and managed to reduce his hours to spend more time at home. Sharon finished a specialization course in gerontology and was working at a clinic specialized in elderly care, applying in her work all the knowledge she had gained from taking care of her own parents. Rachel, said Sharon one afternoon, can I ask you a question? Of course. Do you regret anything? Getting involved with our family, changing your whole life? Rachel thought about the question. You know, Sharon, before I met you all, I felt very alone in the world. It was just me and Ethan against everything. Now I feel like I have a real family, even with all the problems we brought into your life. Sharon, everyone has problems. The difference is when you have a family to help you solve those problems. Do you really consider us your family? I do. You're not my biological family, but you're my family in my heart. And that's even more special because it was a choice. That late afternoon, while watching Mr. Harold playing with Ethan in the garden, Mrs. Dorothy embroidering on the porch, Brian arriving from work and Sharon preparing dinner, Rachel felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. It had started with trying to help two elderly people abandoned at a bus stop, and she ended up finding the family she had always dreamed of having. 2 years after the first meeting at the bus stop, the family's life had completely stabilized. Ethan was already walking and talking, calling Mrs. Dorothy Grandma Dorothy and Mr. Harold Grandpa Harold. For all intents and purposes, they were truly his grandparents. Brian got married again to a woman who embraced the whole extended family. Sharon found a boyfriend who admired her dedication to her parents. And Rachel, to everyone's surprise, started a relationship with the retired lawyer who had helped them with the legal matters. Rachel, said Dr. Thomas one afternoon, have you thought about formalizing your custody of Ethan? What do you mean? Making it official that Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Harold are his adoptive grandparents, for legal matters, inheritances, those kinds of things. The suggestion made sense. Ethan had become an integral part of that family, and it would be important for that to be legally recognized. The process was simple since everyone agreed. In just a few months, Ethan officially had 4 grandparents, the biological ones he'd never met, and the adoptive ones who loved him unconditionally. Now it's official, said Mrs. Dorothy the day the paperwork was finalized. We're a real family. We always were, Mrs. Dorothy, replied Rachel. The papers just confirmed what was already in our hearts. On the eve of the 3rd anniversary of their first meeting, Rachel was organizing old photos in a box when she found some pictures from those early days in the studio apartment. Her, Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. Harold and baby Ethan, all squeezed into that tiny space but smiling. What are these pictures? Asked Ethan, now almost 4 years old. These are photos from when we first met, Ethan. When did you become our family? Yeah, when we became a family. And weren't we family before? Rachel thought about the boy's innocent question. Before, we were lonely people who found each other and discovered we were happier together. Like in the movies. Like in the movies, but better, because it's real. That evening, during family dinner, Brian raised a toast. 3 years ago, our family was broken. Our parents abandoned, my sister and I fighting, Rachel struggling alone to raise Ethan. Today we're a big, united and happy family. And all because a kind-hearted young woman didn't walk past 2 elderly people at the bus stop, added Mrs. Dorothy. Actually, said Rachel, I think you're the ones who saved me. You taught me what unconditional love is, what a real family is. Mr. Harold, who was having one of his most lucid days, raised his glass of juice. Then let's toast to the families we choose, and to the brave people who do what's right, even when it's hard. Everyone toasted, and Ethan, who didn't fully understand the meaning of the moment, but felt the emotion in the air, clapped his hands and shouted, "Long live family!" And truly, long live family, no matter how it's formed, as long as it's formed with love. End of story. Now we want to know your opinion. Do you believe Rachel made the right decision by helping the elderly? What would you do in a situation like that? Tell us in the comments. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Your participation is very important to us.